Researchers spent most of the 20th century seeking to understand how bodies fatigue. What gradually emerged was an idea of the human body as a machine, a highly complex one. This came to a head in 1991 when Michael Joyner proposed a thought experiment. At that time, the limits of endurance running, according to physiologists at least, could be quantified with three parameters: aerobic capacity, known as VO2max, which is analogous to the size of a car's engine; running economy, which is an efficiency measure akin to miles per gallon; and finally, lactate threshold, which can be compared to how long your engine can run at a high capacity before it overheats or seizes. Researchers had measured these variables in lots of elite runners, and those runners tended to have very good values in all three parameters and exceptional values in one or two. Joyner wondered what would happen if a single runner happened to have exceptional but humanly possible values in all three parameters. His calculations predicted that this runner would be able to complete a marathon in 1 hour, 57 minutes and 58 seconds, well beyond the world record at the time. Now we'll come back to that value, but let's unpack that idea of the body as a combustion engine. In reality, our bodies are actually more like electric cars, with each of our cells containing millions of tiny organic batteries between them. These batteries, which power all life on Earth, are called adenosine triphosphates, or ATPs.
Each ATP consists of a tiny molecule, adenosine, attached to three molecules of phosphate, a phosphorus atom surrounded by oxygen atoms. These three phosphates are bound to each other in a chain, storing energy in the chemical bonds between each phosphate. When the last of these phosphates is broken off using water, the tiny quantity of energy that binds it to the second phosphate is liberated, along with one hydrogen ion, leaving behind adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. This liberated energy powers almost everything done by every cell in the body. It fuels the chemical reactions needed for nerve signals, organ function, muscular contraction, and much more.
Like the battery in an electric car, ATPs are rechargeable. By breaking down chemical bonds in sugar and fat molecules, cells acquire the energy to restore ADPs to ATPs by adding back the lost phosphate. And the more we run, the more our bodies have to work to recharge these ATPs.
The first energy production process is called the phosphagen system. It provides the first short, sharp burst of energy. During a 10-meter race, our muscle cells contain just enough ATPs to power a few steps. You see, our organic batteries, being so minuscule, only store one charge each, because they are too heavy for cells to store in large quantities. For example, you would need about 7 kilograms of ATP to fuel a 1-hour walk using your phosphagen system, so your body only stores about 100 grams of ATP at any given moment. After those first few steps, our leg muscles will have depleted their limited supply of ATP, so they start using another molecule similar to ATP called creatine, which also binds to phosphates as creatine phosphate, or PCR, and stores energy. Your creatine phosphate stores too are limited though, becoming about 60% depleted after 10 seconds of sprinting and fully exhausted after 30 seconds. But that first 100 to 200 meters, where you relied on the phosphagen and PCR systems, gives your body the time it needs to fire up another energy recharging process that involves breaking down sugar. Sugar, a simple form of carbohydrate, can be used to recharge ATPs through a process called glycolysis, from glyco for sugar and lysis for breakdown. During glycolysis, enzymes cleave the sugar molecules in half, liberating the energy from its bonds to charge two ATPs. This approach doesn't require oxygen and is rapid enough to provide almost half the energy used during a 30-second sprint. But there's a catch. During glycolysis, the leftover halves of each sugar, molecules known as pyruvates, accumulate faster than cells can get rid of them. As pyruvates pile up, enzymes convert each pyruvate into a molecule called lactate, along with a hydrogen ion. And although lactate is harmless and is eventually used to recharge ATPs, those hydrogen ions make muscle cells increasingly acidic, causing fatigue, pain, and decreased function. Within about 30 seconds of sprinting, your legs will feel as if they are burning. It then takes a lengthy period of time to slowly neutralize the acid and shuttle the surplus lactate into the third long-term aerobic, or requiring oxygen, energy process.
Oxygen is a necessity if you want to run for extended periods. Again, it all comes down to a question of efficiency. I had mentioned that during glycolysis, your body can yield 2 ATPs from a single molecule of sugar. This is fine for a short burst of energy, but sometimes your body needs to go longer, like running a marathon. Well, aerobic metabolism, where you use oxygen to burn a molecule of sugar, yields 18 times more ATP than glycolysis, so 36 ATPs for a single molecule of sugar.
The trouble with aerobic metabolism is that it can't deliver energy quickly because it requires a long sequence of steps and an army of enzymes to function. These steps occur within specialized structures in your body's cells called mitochondria, which are capable of burning not only the pyruvates that come from sugar, but also fats, and in emergencies, proteins. So your aerobic energy system will kick in when you start exercising, but the energy it yields isn't available until you start getting into those longer distances. But the maximum level of energy that you can obtain through aerobic metabolism varies from person to person. We all have a limit. This is an important concept illustrated in the figure on screen and is termed maximal oxygen uptake, or VO2max. Your VO2max reflects your aerobic limits, the maximum rate at which your heart, lungs, and muscles can effectively use oxygen during exercise. Many wearable sensors like GPS running watches use different prediction algorithms to estimate your VO2max, but the gold standard approach involves going to a physiology lab. There, you would be fitted with a mask connected to a machine that measures oxygen consumption while you run on a treadmill. As the speed on the treadmill is increased, your oxygen demands go up. At some point, your oxygen consumption plateaus despite the increasing treadmill speeds. At this limit, your VO2max, your legs demand energy at a rate that aerobic processes can't match, so you have to draw on fast-burning anaerobic, without oxygen, energy sources, like glycolysis. The end of the test is nigh, because speeds above this range cannot be sustained as muscles become more and more acidic due to the buildup of lactate. Your muscle's ability to tolerate high levels of lactate, what we would now call anaerobic capacity, is the other key determinant of endurance events lasting less than about 10 minutes. Your lactate threshold, then, is the intensity of exercise that causes lactate to accumulate in the blood at a faster rate than it can be removed. It essentially defines the border between an activity being aerobic or anaerobic. It too is an important threshold and varies from person to person. Practically speaking, your VO2max doesn't have much of an effect on the speed you can attain during short, maximum intensity bursts, such as that 100-meter sprint. But the longer the distance, the more it matters. For a 100-meter sprint, only 10% of your energy comes from aerobic respiration, but that percentage increases to 30% over 400 meters, 60% for 800 meters, and 80% for a mile. The farther you go, the more your maximum speed benefits from a high VO2 max. And this plays out in elite athletes. Your typical moderately fit male, weighing about 80 kilos, would have a VO2 max of between 50 to 60 milliliters per kilo per minute. This is the unit for VO2 max. It's a volume in milliliters expressed relative to body weight over time. A well-trained recreational athlete might hit the mid-60s, with the elites in the 70s and 80s, and beyond.
Now, there used to be a perception, which stems from the man as machine idea that I was talking about at the start, that VO2 max was the key physiological variable in running performance. The problem with this idea is that for distances beyond about 5 kilometers, runners don't actually use this maximum amount. They run at a submaximal level. And this has been demonstrated in studies where increasing levels of VO2 max are not uniformly associated with improvements in performance. One factor that I've already mentioned is lactate threshold. Physiologists have known since the 1970s that lactate threshold, the fastest speed you can maintain without triggering a dramatic rise in blood lactate levels, is a very accurate predictor of marathon time. That's why Michael Joyner incorporated it into his equation for the sub 2-hour marathon I'd mentioned before, along with a third variable known as running economy.
Running economy is a measure of how much oxygen a runner uses for a given submaximal speed. In theory, two runners can have the same VO2 max, and then the one who is more economical at submaximal speeds is likely to be faster over longer distances. Running economy is defined as the total volume of oxygen needed to run 1 kilometer. This total volume doesn't vary greatly for the same runner at different running speeds, particularly if they are well trained. In other words, if you are an elite or relatively experienced recreational runner, regardless of how fast you run, you use more or less the same volume of oxygen to run the same distance. There are always exceptions. Some runners will become more or less efficient as they run faster, but in general, the value stays the same. Now, this might be a little confusing because I said earlier that the faster you run, the more oxygen you use. And this is true relative to time, but not distance. Taking an athlete running at a pace of 4 minutes per kilometer, let's say he is using about 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen to run that kilometer. If we look at his oxygen use per minute, we can calculate that he is using 50 milliliters of oxygen per kilo per minute because it takes him 4 minutes to run that kilometer and use those 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen. Let's say our runner increases his speed to 3 minutes per kilometer. We can assume that he still needs 200 milliliters per kilo of oxygen to run that kilometer. If we look at his oxygen use per minute, we can calculate that he is using 67 milliliters of oxygen per kilo per minute. But this is the key bit. The use of oxygen per minute goes up with running speed, but the use per kilometer remains relatively constant. He is still using 200 milliliters of oxygen, just over less time. That's how running economy works. I had mentioned in the last lecture how neuromuscular coordination during gait, subtle movements of our legs, arms and trunk in different planes of motion makes the trajectory of our center of mass smooth and undulating. Well, people with better running economy tend to have a lower vertical oscillation of the center of mass. In other words, they have a smoother undulating curve. They also tend to move their arms less and have more flexed knees during the swing phase of gait. Their stride lengths tends to be optimized to the dimensions of their own body, so not too long, not too short. When it comes to height, men who are slightly shorter than average tend to have better running economies, although the reverse is true in women, and the reason for this apparent contradiction is unclear. In terms of overall physique, those with an ectomorphic type of physique and those with a lower body fat percentage tend to have the best running economy because more body fat means more body mass, increasing the oxygen cost of running. People with better running economy usually have a narrower pelvis, smaller than average feet, and have a leg morphology where most of the weight is distributed closer to the hips, so smaller calves relative to their quads. When it comes to the muscle within those legs, while all muscle cells work similarly, the fibers of skeletal muscle cells that move our bones come in two main varieties. At one extreme are slow twitch fibers that do not contract rapidly or powerfully, but use energy aerobically. They don't fatigue easily. These type 1 fibers contrast with the other type, the fast twitch type 2 fibers, which themselves come in two variations in humans. Type 2X fibers burn sugar to generate powerful and rapid forces but fatigue rapidly, while the type 2A fibers produce moderately powerful forces aerobically and thus fatigue at an intermediate rate. Although type 2A fibers are best for medium intensity activities like racing a mile, the type 2X fibers are best suited to bursts of extreme power of short duration like sprinting 100 meters. And because the type 1 fibers are associated with a lower energetic costs of running, in other words, a better running economy, they are suited to longer distances like the marathon.